His TED-style talk is titled, "What Can We Learn from Ebola?" Please welcome to the stage, incoming AAS President-elect, David Covington.
Is it safe to come out yet? I'm just going to peek out a little bit and double check. It looks safe, but is Ebola over? It's actually been much worse than I thought. Are these the only people who survived?
No, you're at the AAS conference.
The AAS conference. Okay, well, I think somebody's going to have to bring me up to speed. Maybe you could, on what's been going on. If we think back, it was just 2.5 years ago that there was a little story on the internet. Now, it was somewhere behind Kim Kardashian breaking the internet, but it was the story of Ebola. It was the largest epidemic in human history. 25,000 people. 10,000 had died, including many healthcare workers. And we weren't paying it much attention because what? Because it was over there. It was in Western Africa. And all that changed on September 30th of 2014 when Thomas Eric Duncan at Texas Health Presbyterian in Dallas contracted the disease and was being treated. And we feared that patient 0, who then infected 2 nurses, and we anticipated that this could spread and spread. So is that what happened? Could you just bring me up to speed a little bit? So Thomas Eric Duncan, we were pretty clear he was going to die. How many millions died after that? None? 0 died. Okay, well, appreciate you bringing me up to speed on that. I might have overreacted. I've been back here for 2.5 years. I may need a shower at this point. We expected a massive spread of the Ebola virus, but we're a scientific, a capable, a thoughtful, and an intelligent nation. So we did what anyone would do. We panicked. We did the equivalent of throwing our arms in the air and turning around 3 times and yelling zombie apocalypse. Now, I clearly may have overreacted. I may actually have caught Ebola, this $2,000 hazmat suit I bought on eBay for 90 bucks. So, but how many of you also overreacted? You thought this disease was coming to your community, or you thought it was coming to your family? Raise your hand. One honest person. Thank you. The Boston Globe said that half of us thought it was coming to our community, and 1 in 3 said it would infect somebody in their family. This got really out of control. How many of you remember the helicopters that were chasing the nurse that dared defy the quarantine and went for a bike ride? Now, 2 Americans, there was actually a third who came in from another country, but only 2 Americans were actually infected from Thomas Eric Duncan, those 2 nurses. And yet, how much money did we appropriate in the fall of 2014 by Congress and the President for Ebola? Someone take a guess. $7.5 billion. Now, Ebola did not hold exclusive claim on the issue of contagion in the year 2014. Julie referenced earlier, beloved Robin Williams died. And when he did, a lot of our discussion had to do with this tweet from the Motion Picture Academy. Jeannie, you're free. And we talked about the fear of contagion. We talked about that if you use the word suicide in the title of a news story, if you use it repeatedly, if you talk about the methodology, or if you give a sense that there might be a release, that suicide is contagious and can spread. Now, let's go back to Ebola for a moment, and I'm going to need some help. Let me exit this. This is a lot harder than you might think. I'll leave this character right here because now in the midst of that panic, and this was our policymakers, our government leaders, our scientists, the CDC, the CNN, we were all fearing an apocalypse. And in the midst of that, Will Humble, who happens to be the public health director here in Arizona, he wrote a blog. Wasn't read by many, but he said, hold on a moment. There is a science that we should think about in the midst of our fear. This is actually well established around infectious disease, and there is a metric called the R0. It's the reproductive rate of any infectious disease. This is the R0 formula. It's essentially the number of new cases that an existing case generates on average over the infectious period of any susceptible population. If the R0 is less than 1, if on average I'm going to infect less than one other person, a disease can't continue. If it's 1, it will go very slow. If it's 2 or 3 or more, you can see that it can spread. On the far right is a disease with an R0 of 18. One person in an unvaccinated population will infect 18 others. Those 18 will each infect 18 others. Those 72 will each infect 18 others. Those 1,296. That's what we feared about Ebola. But what Will said was, let's understand R0. Why do different diseases have different R0s? It has to do with how long it takes to incubate, how long the person is infectious, weeks, days, lifetime, and how is it spread? Is there a vaccination in the population? In this particular case, we're looking at measles, which goes through the mists and the mucus and the spray in the air. So when we had an individual in 2015 at Disneyland with measles, that spread to hundreds of people across 5 states quickly. Ebola, you had to be very close. Now, body fluids and such, we heard a lot about that, but you had to be very close to the person. So what Will Humble wrote was, don't get me wrong, Ebola is a deadly disease, but it's actually the least infectious we know of. You remember SARS, which was behind the Contagion movie when we all started using the hand sanitizer. That was a deadly disease that spread worldwide. Measles, 12 to 18 other individuals. A lot of mumps in the news lately, 15 to 18. Ebola is just hovering above 1. He wrote that right as the rest of us were panicking because he had his eyes directly on the science, and it was clear. Now you can study and you can look at R0 to your heart's content. There's no comparable, suicide is not in any way comparable to any of those infectious diseases. Its R0 is 0. We talked last year about suicide being the result of intolerable pain. Intolerable pain isn't what's catching. Now, we do have instances that we in suicide prevention struggle with. We refer to them as clusters. Here's a cluster that occurred outside of Dublin, Ireland. Within the course of a few weeks and a few short months, we had 3 individuals who died. Young females in the ages of 12 to 17 that all knew of one another, in some cases knew each other, and they died. So what happened in that particular case? We don't want to trivialize suicide as some kind of random choice that sprays from one person to another. So what is it that's going on? Now, this is an actual picture of my grandpappy and a mastodon that was chasing him. You may have heard in the news recently, we just found a 130,000-year-old mastodon and the human tools associated with him in San Diego. I think the human didn't outrun the mastodon. We are here over hundreds of thousands of years not because we're the apex predator, but because of the powerful self-preservation that is built into us. We have a security system that is unassailable. Now, how many of you in the room know of someone, or you yourself would not be here without medical care, medical intervention? My mother had a melanoma removed from her leg that was there far too long. We were so thankful. That was almost 15 years ago now. Without medical care, without the screening and intervention, she probably wouldn't be here. Some of us would also not be here because we went through such intolerable anguish that if suicide was a light switch on our arm, we would have found a way to pull it. Now, our amygdala would have fired deadly fear messages and said, don't do it. But we might have found a way. Many of us are here because there's a wall, a security system that seems very difficult to get across, if not impossible. So what happened with those 3 young girls, the 2 of which followed? Maddie Gould has proven that people don't catch suicide because we ask them about it. So what's going on there? I think we had 3 young women in intolerable anguish and pain, but who assumed that they could not get over that security system, that was impossible. I ran a mud runner event. How many of you have done a mud runner? I did a mud runner, and I found out that a mud runner is not a run. It's a boot camp. And 2 miles in, I said, I'd never quit anything, much less but I came up against this wall with no handholds, and an intoxicated small dog would have done better than I did when I hit that wall. And I backed up. I put my hands on my knees and said, how do you quit? Where do I go? Where's the exit? Because that is impossible to cross. And the moment I did that, I saw a whir go past me. And I looked at that blur. It was a young woman about a foot shorter than me. Not necessarily a runner's build, but she went flying to that wall and her foot hit it like an arrow. And she catapulted up, and somehow she got the tips of her fingers on the top of that wall. She took her left leg, flopped it up, her toe touched the top of that wall, and then she flipped over and was gone. And I said, what do you know? And in an instant, something I thought was physically impossible for me to achieve, I knew was totally achievable. Now, I did watch her technique, so don't get me wrong. I followed through and did what she did. But the key factor was someone like me did something I thought was impossible to do. And I did it in the very next try. And I believe those 3 young women, when one of them saw that someone like them, it's not so much the media per se, it's I learned somebody like me did something that was impossible. That's dangerous. It's the courage that spreads, not the suicide. Courage is contagious, dangerous in this regard. Now, the courage we talk about in our culture is the courage to die. Those are the discussions that come up. Robin Williams, Kurt Cobain, etc. Suicide is really, in many ways, kind of the last stigma. It doesn't need any extra help. But we've made it hard. We've had a culture where the voices to talk about the courage to live, the courage to hang on, the courage to somehow find a way to survive or even thrive. If we go back to our conference in 1987, those voices weren't heard here. They weren't heard really anywhere. They were silent. We ran in panic from Ebola, but we just shut down the conversation because we were in our safety suit. Let's protect. Let's not have contagion. In 1990, that was all breached by patient zero, if you will, William Styron, who wrote intimately about his own suicidal depression. National figure. And here at this conference by 1996-97, we have 2 amazing leaders in Heidi Bryan and DeQuincy Lezine who begin to not only talk about the kinds of things we already talk about here, but about their own personal experience, about their courage to struggle on. And what did that do? Spread. By 2005, Kara Anna, Eduardo Vega, Terry Wise, Jordan, Kevin, others are beginning to talk about theirs. Now, in many cases, there were huge hurdles to do that. I remember many of us rent our clothes when the Bridge documentary came out because of fears of contagion. I remember Terry Wise trying to get her to come to speak here in Phoenix and being told no by state leaders because of her message that it would talk about methodology. By 2011, this voice of courage began to spread further. We had keynote speakers, 4 individuals in Los Angeles, talk about their own lived experience. In 2011, we had a breakthrough keynote by C.W. Tillman and a host of others that were with him, talking about their own experiences, and we've talked about Desiree and her leadership today. That then spread further, and by the next year we had a panel of new breakout leaders, Misha, Samantha, and others who began to talk about their stories. And it just keeps extending. Now we have people here at this conference. How many of you are from Australia at this conference? Are you guys still here, or have you found your way out? Now, we were with people from Australia last night, and somebody's already mentioned Amy today, that in her life talked about her own struggle. And it just expands. These are 42 people who are talking about their own lived experience, talking about their lives, and that is now giving courage to others. What if those 2 young women in Dublin not only had a narrative about someone who died, but also about others who had found a way through? What if? And this community continues to grow. I've added the Live Through This pictures from Desiree Stage's website. Now, that group can maybe immunize. Maybe it's a vaccination. We'll have to study this and see. But there's a concept called herd immunity or community immunity, that you don't have to vaccinate everybody with the measles vaccine to save a community. It's a certain percentage. The R-naught, through the science, tells us what the percentage is for each disease. It's time to do something different. Now, last year we talked about the ice bath, for those of you who are here, and that suicide comes from intolerable pain. Mark Graham talks about that they've done research about putting your feet in an ice bath. The mere presence of a single caring individual in the room with you doubles the amount of time someone can hang on in that ice bath. What more if it's someone who has been there, who has lived through it, who knows what it feels like, to borrow from Craig's book. This is an actual picture of me finishing the Mud Runner event. It's not, but it could be. It could be me, it could be you, it could be any of us. Are we going to put back on this infectious suit and go back into the safety? Are we going to fan the flames of an epidemic that we're starting to see spread? A new narrative about there is a courage to hang on, live through, find a way, in some cases thrive, but to survive. The R-naught of courage is infinite. Let's all work together to create a new world where we spread that courage.
everybody. Since this is partially a student division directed plenary, and we are the youngest division of AAS, there's going to be some movement going on. This is us sowing our oats. Okay, so please ignore folks moving on the podium. We're going to get started while that gets done. That way we can keep moving on. My name is Raymond Tucker. I am the current student division director. We are in our second year of AAS having a student division. And it's really my honor to assemble this panel and introduce pairs of mentors and mentees who are dedicated, selfless researchers who have influenced the field partially through their mentorship. We had three pairs, as you can tell. I am definitely not Thomas Joyner. I am not Mike Anestis' mentor from graduate school. Unfortunately, Thomas Joyner was unable to be with us today, but I'm looking forward to hearing Mike speak about that as well. So my hope is these folks will talk about how some of their research ideas have been influenced by their mentorship and by the mentorship of those around them in the division. Before we get started though, I was hoping to do a little bit of audience participation here. And this is that part of training that everybody hates, but bear with me. If you would feel comfortable, anyone out there who's currently sitting or standing who feels as though anybody up here, and Thomas Joyner himself as well, was a significant mentor in your professional development or your research, would you please stand up or raise your hand? Wow, look at that. So keep them up, keep standing for a second here. What about folks who feel like they have maybe mentored some of the folks on this panel or Dr. Joyner? Keep your hands, everybody who had their hands up. I want to see an additive effect here. Great. And what about the folks who have been mentored by some of the people up on this stage, as well as those who are standing and have their hands raised? So if we were able to take a look at this, I would say a good half of the room there had a hand up or was standing up during this. And I think this is one of the most amazing things about mentoring, of how many students, how many clinicians, how many folks learning to talk about their lived experience are influenced by the mentorship of folks in AAS. And although of course we are tied together predominantly by our desire to end suicide, of course mentoring may be one of the other ways that we're tethered together the most. So I'm excited to have this panel today. Before we get started, a couple of quick programming notes. First, this is very much a research panel. We're a bunch of research nerds who love this aspect of what we do. We certainly realize that mentorship plays a role in all of our divisions, and I personally would like to thank all those mentors across AAS who are working with students, predominantly as the students in the student division. Additionally, our initial list had 30 people up here, so there is a ton of folks we would have loved to hear from, and we hope to hear from you throughout the conference. So with that note, I'd like to turn it over to Pete and Jennifer.
Thanks, Rick. Is that on? Can you hear me in the back? No. How about now? Oh, there we go. So I'm Pete Guitierrez, and Ray sent us a few questions in advance to think about, and in something uncharacteristic for me, I actually have notes. So the first question was, where were you in terms of university, and what was your area of research focus when you and your mentee started working together? I should probably introduce you too, right? That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I could, yeah. This is Dr. Muehlenkamp, Jennifer Muehlenkamp, a newly promoted professor, full professor at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire. And when Jennifer and I started working together, we were both at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. And my research at the time was focused on adolescent suicide risk and protective factors. And we had a lot of fun thinking about the projects that we were working on when we first got started. And I came up with this long list, and Jennifer added to it, and we realized that the shortest thing to say, I'm not being overly brief, was we were doing a lot of scale development work at the time. And Jennifer really added to what I was doing because of her interest, which I'll let her talk about because I want to shut up.
Thanks. So I was really fortunate to be able to jump into projects pretty much immediately once I joined the program at NIU and working under Pete. And in addition to the skill development, what we did is I had a very strong interest in non-suicidal self-injury and how that related to suicide risk. And so he was really open and willing to support that interest as it complemented his work. And so as we were going through data and looking at projects and coming up with very long lists, one of the things that we really did is we talked about this and that, how I really kind of brought up non-suicidal self-injury, brought that interest into our work together, and really started to develop there. And so both kind of complemented his work, but then what was really beneficial as a mentor is he was really able to allow me to pursue my interests and to help guide that, which is something that I've continued to carry on with some of the undergraduate students that I currently work with. And one of the other questions we were asked to kind of address was, what did we learn from working together? And I think this builds off our long list because we were joking back and forth as we were prepping for this panel about how one of the things I think we really learned was how to juggle multiple projects at once. And we were both laughing about how even though we take on a lot, we were always encouraging each other to prioritize and learn to say no, but neither of us have really learned that lesson yet, but have really kind of, you know, I think grown from that. And I think one of the best things from our mentorship relationship is really being able to complement each other's strengths and to really help push each other to continue to achieve. And even though our work has shifted a little bit away from where we originally started, and that, you know, Pete has really gone on and developed quite a successful career with some of the military suicide prevention. I continue to work in non-suicidal self-injury with adolescents and young adults, but I've also transitioned into doing a lot of campus-based suicide prevention work and programming. We still really have been able to help support each other in those pursuits and grow from there. What do you? Yeah. What do you want to? I was going to say. Well, we'll take questions later. We'll transition because we want some other groups to talk as well. So, maybe Michael and Amy, and then.
Sure. Okay, I'm Amy Fiske, and I'm an associate professor at West Virginia University. This is Michael Nadroff, whom everybody here knows. I have to say that's really sort of a mentor's dream, right? To have your mentee do something wonderful like chair the 50th anniversary conference. Michael and I were thinking it might be nice to start with talking a little bit about our philosophy of mentoring, and I also want to just give a nod to all of the people who've mentored me. Margaret Gatz is my primary academic mentor at USC. One of the things I learned from her is that it's possible to learn from the people that you mentor as well as the other way around. So just cutting to the chase, that's the whole point of my remarks today, is I've gotten a lot more from the people I have mentored than they could ever have gotten from me. But my philosophy of mentoring, I take from Woody Allen, where he said 80% of success is showing up. And I actually think that, I mean that actually literally, because if I didn't have a position where I could get graduate students trained, then I wouldn't have the ability to invite people in to get the training that would then give them the keys to go on and do research in this area and potentially contribute to what we're all trying to do here. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to use that gift kind of wisely, and what I study is suicide in late life. So I've tried to pick students or applicants who are interested in studying suicide in late life. And you can imagine that is not a huge group of people applying to graduate school in psychology to try and study that. In fact, when I looked over the program for this conference, guess how many presentations had the word older, aging, aged, geriatric, gerontology? Can you guess how many presentations here? One. There's one. Yeah. Danielle Yellen, wherever you are, thank you. So at any rate, so this is my area. So I try to basically accept students that I can train who can do this. And when Michael applied for our program, he said he was interested in studying suicide. He thought old people were fine. He'd be very happy to work with old people while he was in graduate school, but that wasn't his primary interest. But I was very interested in working with Michael, and especially because what a wonderful thing to work with somebody who's that straightforward and honest. And it's turned out to be really wonderful and fun. So let me let Michael talk about his philosophy a little bit.
This is always dangerous to call someone out in the crowd when you can't see where they are. But I'm going to put one of my students to the test to see if he's here. Nathan Barclay, are you here? If so, stand up. So Nathan got an interesting task when we started working together, going back to the thought that, as mentors, we can learn a lot from our students. So I gave Nathan this task, this impossible task of, trying to figure out hypotheses to data sets. I just gave him a data set with a code book, and I said, come up with hypotheses, and I gave him a scale. I said, come up with names for these factors. I didn't give him the literature to refer to. I didn't give him much of anything. I just told him to go and do it. And why did I do that? I talked to all the students after. When we work in this field, we can get to where there's a schema that we get based on the literature, based on our training. We think of things in a certain way, and it can actually limit our ability to look at the possibilities. So students like Nathan have been really helpful to me in getting a fresh perspective, and maybe, thinking, well, something that I thought was impossible, going back to the last talk, maybe seeing something that I thought was impossible actually made some sense, but I had written it off because I was just so used to the way it's always been. And I think one of the ways that students help us is that they help open our eyes to what may be. So as mentors, they enhance us in that way. And also one of the things that all my students can attest to is all the many errors and things that we've done where afterwards, like, we probably should have done it this other way. But you learn so much from your students and working on these projects together and being that collaborative team. And that's one of the things I've learned from my mentorship experience. And I know for Amy and I, we had the same thing where my initial master's thesis, we were recruiting older adult suicide attempt survivors. And we did, we were convinced this study was going to work. It definitely did not. We just didn't get enough referrals. But we learned from that. We moved on, and you learn. So we get so much more from, so much from our mentees. And that's one of the things I wanted to be sure to say, especially to the student division, just how much you give back to your mentors as well.
I'm also not Thomas Joyner, but I did work with him in graduate school, and I came into a really fortunate situation where when I arrived at Thomas's lab, it was a really big lab full of a lot of really smart people doing different things. So it wasn't a single track where everybody thinks the same thing and is sort of plugged into a specific role. What he fostered was the idea of you get a lot of people together who think about this stuff maybe a little bit differently and let them run with their own stuff under one sort of larger shared interest, and new ideas are going to come out of that. So I felt like I was in an environment where I had, obviously great guidance on this important topic, but also a lot of freedom to move within that and find my own space in it. And so the second big thing I think came out of this that Thomas has fostered in me, and I'm trying really hard to do for my students, is helping students develop a sense of independence, that they are self-sufficient and have done the work, that they aren't entirely dependent upon the person who has more letters after their name at that time. And I think the reason that's so important is it's very easy for all the students to have imposter syndrome right now, but what I think you don't realize is how easy it is for all the professors to still have it later on too. And so the more that's facilitated in your training, the better equipped you are to sort of manage tackling a hard problem that doesn't yield immediate sort of dividends without constantly sort of bearing the weight of that. So I think that's something that I got out of that mentorship relationship quite a bit.
I just want to briefly build on something that Mike said, since Thomas isn't here. As many of you know, Thomas and I work very closely together and have known each other for many years. And several years ago at a conference, we were chatting, and at the time he had, 375 articles on his CV, something like that. He's now over 450. And I said, Thomas, how the hell do you do it? That's a lot of freaking publications. And he didn't have to think about it at all. He said, well, when you have as many amazing, brilliant, hardworking students as I do, and as Mike said, you give them the space to pursue what they want to pursue. He said, it's really easy to crank out 20 articles a year. So my students do a lot of the work, and they always put me on it because I'm involved in some way, and so my CV just gets bigger and bigger. So that relates to the next point that I wanted to make was that working with Jennifer was at a time in my professional development when my lab was really growing, and there was just more work than one person could manage, and so I started delegating some supervisory responsibilities to the more senior students who worked in my lab, and Jennifer just stepped right into that role, and you made it look easy. I don't know that it was, but and that was really important for our productivity, because it allowed us to expand, it allowed us to do more work, and it really taught me as a mentor not only that it's safe to do that with my students, but that it's really a good idea. And this was long before I had that conversation with Thomas. So, you know, if I was kind of doing something on a slightly smaller scale that Thomas was doing, I figure I'm in pretty good company.
Okay, so I guess I'll respond. Sure. I think as Pete was talking, I think the thing that I take away from it, and I really like this idea of building on your approach to mentorship, and I think you can translate this across not just the research productivity, but also if you're doing prevention work, if you're in the crisis field, if you're a survivor, you know, someone who's bereaved who wants to mentor other people who are recently bereaved. I think part of the process that you learn through mentoring is really using your knowledge, your experience, your expertise to help grow and support the needs of the people that you're working with in mentoring. And I think that's something that really evolved out of our mentoring relationship, and even our current professional relationship too, where you really get to know people. And I think one of the things I really try to impart, I'm at an undergraduate institution now, so I mostly work with undergraduates, and I love it. And I think one of the best things is to see, again, the fresh perspectives, the new eyes, the energy that comes in, and for me to be able to work with those individuals and help craft their interests, get them interested in now pursuing advanced degrees in suicidology, is just phenomenal. And so I think from the mentoring perspective, it really is about really providing that space to allow people to grow and to flourish and to chase their ideas with the guidance of someone who has some wisdom and expertise to go. And I love the fact when I get to look into the eyes of my students, and we're looking at data or projects, and I'm thinking of one that I was doing recently, and I'm like, you know, I haven't run these statistics in a long time. I'm not sure I really remember how to do this. And so I pull out my book in front of them, right? And I role model, okay, I need to read through here, you know, to try to figure this out, to make sure we're interpreting right. And I think that just goes along with the idea of showing that even as we're established individuals in our fields, we can still learn, and we need a role model that it's okay to not know it all and to kind of grow and discover. And so that's something that I really try to impart from in my current mentorship roles, with I really gained a lot from having good mentors. Pete, and then also many individuals at AAS, because I'll transition so other people can speak about this too, but one of the questions we were asked to address was how AAS also served kind of a mentoring capacity, a professional mentoring capacity. And I think that's been really important, because this is an organization where many of us in the field did kind of grow up. And it's fun to see it expand and to reach so many more people. But I see, you know, Pete was my primary mentor, but through his connections and relationships, there were many other people who are sitting in the audience and fellow colleagues now who were students when I was a student that also helped mentor ideas and kind of grow the field. And so I think that's important to acknowledge too.
I'd love to play off that a little bit. And you know, when I look at my history and how I got to where I was, really I was mentored by so many people within AAS. So when I was at Notre Dame for my undergrad, there wasn't a suicide researcher there, but I was so blessed to have an expert right down the road with John McIntosh at IUSB, who's mentored many of us, and including Christopher Poe, my current postdoc, so I owe you in so many ways. And it was Dr. McIntosh's letter that really, I know, made an impact with Dr. Fiske, and said, okay, this guy's serious. And then later on, you worked with Tom Ellis and so many individuals within the field. Yeah, and I think many of us just have so many of these mentors who we've seen throughout the years. And one thing I did want to mention, speaking more to the students, is kind of going back to the courage slide. Thinking about, you know, these I know these are huge people in the field, but approach them. Talk to them, see if there are connections that you can make, and try to see if there are ways that you can get mentored by these individuals, because it's hugely important. And one quick funny story, but this is absolutely true, and I just have to tell it. One of the things that gave me that courage was my first AAS conference, which was 2008 in Boston. And I remember there was some snafu early on, and the fire alarm went off, and all of us in the conference hotel ended up in the lobby in basically our pajamas. And to me, I was looking around, I was a first-year grad student, and I just thought, there's something about it, it's like, these are actual human beings. It's just something that humanized them to me and gave me this confidence of being able to go up to someone like Pete Guitierrez, and as I often did, as you'll probably remember, and say, hey, I'd like to continue in this field. What can I do? How can I be successful? But making those connections is so important. And so many of my mentors have come from AAS, and I'm deeply indebted to it.
I remember that event where everybody was in pajamas. That was really something. In fact, my first AAS conference was in 1993 in San Francisco. And if I'm right, wasn't that a joint with the International Association? Yeah. And so I've been coming to AAS for quite a while, but that was before I even went back to graduate school and got my degree. However, I have not always come every year. And in fact, I went for a series of, I think, 4 years or so every year while Michael was in graduate school, and also Sarah Nassim, who should be here somewhere today as well. And I was fortunate to have as graduate student in my lab. And as I was going back and looking at all the AAS conferences I had been at, and the ones that I somehow just couldn't find funding or motivation to get to, I realized that when I've got students in my lab who are deeply passionate about doing suicide research, I somehow ended up at the meetings. I didn't recognize that correlation until afterwards. I was looking at that. So again, it kind of goes to my point that I get more from my students than they get from me, and it certainly has brought me here. And I also want to tell a quick anecdote about that conference in 2008, which is, I was a fairly new faculty member at the time. Michael was my 4th student ever, who was my 4th year as a faculty member. And I somehow had a little bit of money left over in my budget and figured the thing to do with it was to bring all my students to AAS. So all 4 of my graduate students, we flew them all to Boston, and we had a wonderful time. It was really, at least speak for myself, I thought it was really terrific. I didn't really realize that as a faculty member I wasn't going to get money to do this every year, unfortunately. But it ended up being, I think, a nice way to kick off this period of spending a lot of time at AAS. And the reason I'm here today is because last year, Julie Lutz, one of my newer students, said, shouldn't we really actually be going to the suicide conference if we're doing this? So I indebted my students for that.
I'm actually kind of a newbie to AAS. My first conference was 2010, so I guess you can say I didn't really necessarily grow up in AAS, but informally I did, and that so many AAS members were influences on me throughout my graduate career. But when I did start coming, I got hooked immediately, and I tell my students, if you're only going to go to one conference, if it's a financial thing or you're making decisions, this is the one to go to, because there are so many people doing things that you're interested in that you can talk to, you can meet, you can build collaborations. And every time we get back to Hattiesburg, somebody has some conversation they're telling me about that they have with someone else, and some new idea that gets them energized to do something new. So I think we're sort of growing up late in the game in AAS. I'm really appreciative of that. One thing I also wanted to say, sort of building off what Jennifer said about just kind of showing your students that you're still learning. I think another thing that got sort of shown to me in graduate school by Thomas, and then again I try to echo for them, is as you're mentoring someone, openly be yourself, be sort of your happiest, truest version of you, because these folks are looking at you, seeing like, what's this job going to be like, and who am I going to be in this position? And you want them to see a path towards not just hard work, because there's a lot of that, but hard work and a happy life. And so I think there's not necessarily one way to do that, but I think it's something that needs to sort of be on the mind of mentors as they go forward. It was definitely a lesson I learned at Florida State that I'm trying to carry forward.
I'd forgotten all about the fire alarm in Boston. yeah, definitely pajamas. And it was 3 in the morning, by the way. That was fun. So one of the other things that we were asked to think about was how did AAS as an organization, and the conferences in particular, affect our mentoring? I've been a member of AAS for 20 years. I have missed 2 conferences in that time. And one of the things that I always appreciated was my colleagues who also came with their students. You know, academic suicidology is a pretty small field, and so it's always exciting to see, you know, new first-year students attending their first AAS conference and really sort of getting excited about the work that's going on, and then, you know, meeting people, and as Michael said, you know, having the courage to go up and introduce themselves to someone, you know, whose work they've read. And I always told my students that the best thing about AAS is we're nice people. We really are. I come home to AAS every year because I love you guys. And I've got so many very good friends in this association who I met because we're passionate about suicide research and suicide prevention. And so I would just always encourage my students, like, go up, introduce yourself. If I'm there, I'll be happy to introduce you to someone, but don't be scared, they won't bite. You know, Dave Jobs is a nice guy. Just say, hi, Dr. Jobs, I work with Pete, it'll be fine. I think Jim Mazza probably for a while was feeling a little competitive about like who could bring more students to the conference. Those of you who know Jim know he's slightly like that. But that was great as a faculty member to have colleagues who were all really invested in bringing students to this conference, introducing them to people, helping them make connections. Because I think it helped me as a professional to form more collaborations. And it got to the point where like either my students or my former students were introducing me to people who I hadn't met, which was really, really nice. So I totally agree with what Amy's been saying. I get far more out of my mentees than I think that I ever give them.
I don't know what more to add to that, really. But except to just say that I think what this really does demonstrate is the important role that we all play in really kind of helping to shape the future direction of the field and how we're going to advance. And I think one of the things that I still, similar to Pete, do feel this idea of like this is sort of that home conference for me professionally, just because of the contacts, but I think because of not only the competition with Jim about how many students can come, but also the ability to connect with others, it's really led to the progression of collaborations. And so when I think of not only being able to go up and go outside my comfort zone and introduce myself to different individuals and get to know leaders in the field, it's also been very beneficial in that the students came together. And so when I look, I mean, at the table, those of us who are here, those of us who I know in the audience and stuff, we met here as students of these leaders in the field, and now we're collaborators, we're colleagues, we work together to advance things, and now our students are being introduced to their students, and so we joke a little bit about the generational aspect of things. But I think that's what's really important for this field, and like what was mentioned before, if we really want to make a difference, we all need to be working together in preventing suicide from all of our different areas and expertise and mentoring the next generations to bring them up and get them collaborating. So it's not just researchers collaborating, but it's also the other individuals. So those who are bereaved, those who have lived experience, those who are working in the crisis field, to come together so we all connect. So your students that are working for you as volunteers can connect with our students who are working as researchers, so that we can all really grow this and make a difference. And I think that's something that AAS is really poised to do. And so when I look into the future, so we look historically, this is how it's really developed and shaped our careers, and as I look towards the future, and I have this emphasis on sort of the prevention spin, especially on our college campuses, I really see that that's where the next mentoring role comes in for this organization, and I'm excited to see that potentially happening.
just that clock is a liar, liar, pants on fire situation, and so we've got about 5 minutes left. And I was hoping, I was hoping that if part of this was we were going to talk a little bit about some of the research potentially that you're heading toward, and where you might be interested in mentoring postdocs, interns across the board. I mean, every level of student could be represented by a mentor on this panel. So I'd love to hear quickly in the next 5 minutes, I guess, what you'd be excited to mentor some students on. Maybe a shameless plug for some of your work. Well, I'll say what I'm working on right now and where I want the most help is guns and suicide. There aren't many of us doing it, and so any of you who are interested, we're collecting data maniacally and want to collaborate with you. I think it's such a central issue to us moving forward as a field, and so we're looking for help. So it doesn't really matter to me where you are on your developmental trajectory. The door's open.
I'm really focusing on downstream suicide prevention efforts, particularly suicide-specific psychosocial interventions, and I'm looking for sites for multi-site clinical trials, and I've been picking people's brains already here about that. I don't work in a traditional university setting anymore, so I only have postdoctoral fellows for the most part. But you know, if you're someplace that's got access to clinical populations and you're interested in clinical trial research, I'm interested in talking to you.
Some of my work, it really continues to examine the relationship between non-suicidal self-injury and suicide risk, and then, as I noted before, really looking at the effectiveness of prevention programming, especially on college campuses. And so if you have interest in that, I'm very happy to mentor. Again, like I said, I'm at an undergraduate institution, so I don't take graduate students at this point, but I still facilitate a lot of collaborations with people at other institutions, both professionals as well as students. So there's certainly avenues that way as well.
I just like to call on my students again to make sure they're here since they can't see them. Katrina Speed, are you here? If so, stand up. Hello. And May Cotter. Okay. Well, don't make her, she's volunteering somewhere at this conference. So I wanted to call on her for two reasons. A, I wanted to point out the fact that we actually recruited her from a crisis line. So, you know, if you are working in the field and you have interest in going back to school, you know, getting a bachelor's, master's, PhD, do consider it because your background is extremely valuable to us. My research is on sleep and suicide, especially insomnia and nightmares and suicide. And we're moving towards more and more intervention research. The reason I wanted to call on Kat Speed is because her study is actually going to be a nightmare treatment study, her dissertation, in which we will look at impacts on suicidal ideation. So that's kind of where we hope to go.
First of all, I want to just mention in my lab, part of what we're doing is sleep-related research, and that's because of Michael. If he actually brought that interest into my lab, I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for him. And in fact, there are, I think, almost a dozen presentations at this conference about sleep, which is kind of neat. That's becoming an interest area. I'm really interested in discovery-related research, even a little more than treatment research. So folks in my lab, what I'm especially interested in is things that might be reasons that older adults die by suicide. And I'm following this track of looking at, for example, things that relate to independence in older adults. And so I've done a little bit of research on whether it's personality factors of a person who particularly values independence, or how people cope with loss of independence if they become chronically ill. But one of the things that I believe, kind of jumping on what Mike had said earlier, is I think an important thing is for graduate students at the end of their time to know how to work independently on their own research program. Not that they would be just doing my research program and replicating that. So I'm looking for people with sort of broad interests as well, and train graduate students, undergraduate students, and if I had fun as a postdoc.
I can't thank you all more for your selfless time, as always, at AAS. Thank you so much. I hope folks will visit the Web of Mentoring panel out in the lobby to honor some of their mentors with some strings. Maybe it's Hug a Mentor Day, I'm not really sure. But show some gratitude for the folks who helped bring you up in AAS. Thank you.
okay, everything?
David Jones is Professor of Psychology and Associate Director of Clinical Training at the Catholic University of America. He's been working in suicidology for more than 3 decades, with a particular emphasis on suicidology. His TED Talk is entitled Growing Up in AAS. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. David Jones.
There have been many times on my path to this moment when I almost didn't make it. And I didn't get here on my own. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a little boy, I was a heartbroken sports fan. The Indians were terrible. My beloved Browns had some good seasons and a decent team, but they never made it out of the playoffs. And the Cavs were not NBA champions. Growing up in Cleveland, you get a bit of a chip on your shoulder. You feel like an underdog because we were the butt of national jokes. We were the mistake on the lake. But for me, growing up in Cleveland was a great place to grow up. And I could see how my whole life was going to play out before me. But as a teenager, I kind of thought maybe I wanted something really different. And so I ended up going to school at the University of Colorado. But before that, I sought out a very different experience, which was to go on Outward Bound in Colorado. In Outward Bound, you learn about high altitude mountaineering, technical rock climbing. And at 17, I spent a month in the San Juan Mountains, learning a lot about myself. Rock climbing became my obsession in the coming years, and that's why I went to the University of Colorado. You'd think it'd be for the academics, but no, it's for the climbing. And I spent many days becoming an avid student of massive granite rock walls. My friends and I would skip class to go climbing. We spent whole weekends in the mountains doing multi-pitch technical climbs, bouldering, and of course in college there are other distractions. Here's the point. I was an aimless psychology major. I had no sense of direction. I was having a great time, but I had no sense of direction. It wasn't until about a month before graduation that I realized I wanted to become a clinical psychologist, which was a little late to do the things to be able to get into a highly competitive PhD program. And so I packed it up and headed back to Cleveland. I moved back in with Mom and Dad, and I was determined to make up for lost time. I got a part-time job through friends of friends working in a children's hospital in downtown Cleveland. I went to Case Western Reserve, and I literally went door to door knocking until I found a professor who took me on as a volunteer research assistant. I took a GRE class to raise my scores. I applied to 12 different PhD programs with great anticipation and got completely shut out. I was devastated, and I thought, I got to regroup here. And I thought maybe I shot too high. Maybe what I need to do is apply to a master's program and use that as a stepping stone to get into PhD. And so I faithfully set off to pursue a degree at AU, switching my application for the PhD program to the master's program, and was accepted by the skin of my teeth. It was there that I was captivated by my professor in psychopathology, Dr. Lanny Berman. Lanny, to me, was a quintessential clinical psychologist. He had the beard, he had the intellect, he had the thriving practice. And to me, he was going to be the ticket to getting into a PhD program. But there was a problem to my plan. Lanny didn't work with master's students. He was a full professor, but part-time on our faculty, he only had time for the PhD students. But I wasn't to be determined. I was not to be deterred. I was determined to work with him. I went to his office hours every week. I brought him coffee. And I wore him down, and he took me on. And in that moment, I had found my mentor. And I had backed my way into this field that would become my life's passion. Now, he supervised my master's thesis, a psychological autopsy study, an analog study. We got some great data. Then he said, okay, now you have to go present at a national conference. I said, great, when and where? Sign me up. He said, well, the AAS conference next spring in Anchorage, Alaska. Oh, Anchorage. Yeah. So I'm living on student loans. That is absolutely a bridge too far. So I called mom and dad and said, guys, I really need to go to this conference. And God love them, they said, okay, we'll get you there. And I went to my first AAS conference in Anchorage, Alaska. It was an auspicious start. I'm presenting at my first professional conference, and my discussant is Dr. Bob Lippman, one of the developers of the psychological autopsy technique that Laney had recruited. And there sitting directly in front of me is Dr. Norman Farborough. And next to him is Dr. Jerome Motto. I'm starstruck. These are the founders of our field. At my first presentation, I'm a little intimidated. However, I somehow got through this experience. It's all a blur. But I do remember Bob and Norm coming up afterwards saying, not too bad, good start. Maybe you should come visit us at the Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Center. And I raced off to my room. I said, thank you. And I raced off to my room, and I called my folks and said, guys, I need to go to Los Angeles. And God love, my mom and dad made it possible. I rerouted my trip back to DC with a stopover in LA. I went to the fabled Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Center, the birthplace of our field. And I got my tour, and I met this man. I did meet Ed Schneiderman. And it was an amazing experience, and that was it for me. That was 1984, and I've never looked back. I've come to this conference for 33 straight years. I've never missed, and I've always presented. And where are we today, 50 years later, from the birth of this conference? We are 1,000 times better prepared to make the differences we aim to make than we were 50 years ago. This field is exploding. Each year, this conference sets records. AAS is truly the big tent of suicide prevention. With our divisions and our spirit, we take all comers. But for me, coming to this conference every spring is like coming home to family. Coming home to you people. All of us touched by this topic in many different ways. All of us united in this common cause. Now, where am I today? Suppose you can look at it and say, I'm in the catbird seat. I've really made my way in this field. But I know I'm here because of my mentors. Lanny, who introduced me to the field, Marshall Linehan, who took me under her wing to teach me how to do clinical trials. And now I'm a professor of psychology at Catholic University. I've published lots of papers and book chapters, and I have a half dozen books. I get to recruit the best and brightest students who come to this conference every year with me, and they're amazing. I've been developing the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality now for all these years, and I've received millions in grant funding to study CAMs and its dissemination. Along with my wife Colleen, we've developed a training company to train CAMs across the nation and abroad. And in recent years, I'm pinching myself. I'm getting career achievement awards for this passionate work that means so much to me. I have now the career that I could never even fantasize about in my aimless days back in Boulder. And yet, next week, I can lose a patient to suicide. As a clinician, I'm not immune to losing someone just because I know a lot about this topic. And as a treatment researcher, we treat and study very tough cases. And in the last year, we've lost 2 patients in 2 different trials to suicide. And incurred the heartbreak that comes with this. With the treatment team and the clinicians, we work so hard to save these lives. Suicide is really hard. It's very challenging. And what I've come to see is there's no catbird seat. There's no room for smugness in this field. You can't be a know-it-all. Suicide's just too hard. It will break your heart, and it will humble you. And yet we persevere. I personally persevere because now as a mentor myself and as a researcher, I get to create countless magic moments. In our Seattle study, we have a young clinician using CAMs for the very first time with a very difficult patient who suffers from intense suicidal self-hatred. But I've got a first-year student who's come with something that she calls mental time travel for suicidal self-hate. And I can take her and put them together to create a moment of synergy and innovation that might just save a life. That's why I do this. Now, where are we headed? Because that's obviously why we're here. 50 years is a big deal. I get that, but where we're headed is really important. I see three things. First, technology. It's unavoidable. It's ubiquitous. It's just going to grow and evolve. Can you imagine being a highly suicidal person, going to a hospital, going to the emergency department, with every expectation that you're going to be waiting for hours to see your doctor, only to be handed a tablet to be engaged by an avatar? Dr. Dill. Doing a highly modified version of CAMS, interactively in a therapeutic assessment based on our research, so that when your doctor shows up a few hours later, they will now have a report based on our research about the nature of your suicidal struggle and ideas about your disposition that's in your best interest. This isn't pie in the sky. This is already happening, and there's a lot more to come. Here's what else I see. We've got a problem in our field. It's been around for a long time. We need to fix it. There's too big a gap between psychology and psychiatry. It can't be either or, it must be both and. We must unite these fields. And for our part, in the psychological research we do, we are moving steadfastly towards the neuroscience of effective psychological care and the mechanisms of change. We need more. It can't be either or, it's got to be both and to make the impact that we need to make. Here's what else I see. With 9.8 million Americans with suicidal thoughts every year, we don't have enough clinicians to go around. We can't clinically treat our way out of this problem. That's about the size of the population of the state of Michigan. It's a lot of people. What we need is a much larger workforce. What we need is a paraprofessional workforce of good people, big hearts, yes, people with experience, who are properly trained and supervised to supplement clinical care. What we really need is a National Mental Health Service Corps at the level of a Peace Corps initiative or AmeriCorps to significantly supplement clinical care if we need to make the differences we need to make. And now it's your turn. And for all of you students out here, I want to tell you, find your mentor. And within reason, don't take no for an answer. Persist in having your mentor open doors for you to create opportunities for things that you can do in this world to make a difference in this cause. And for you mentors, find your students. And take on as many of them as you can responsibly to create opportunities, because we need so much more talent and innovation in this field to make the differences we aim to make. And now for each and every one of you in this audience, I want to challenge you in the next calendar year to commit to one act of mentorship, large or small, to yes, push this field forward, or just make this world a better place. As you've heard this morning, mentorship is huge. And now, in recognition of the importance of this conference to transform lives, just like it has for mine, I'd like to invite my wife, Colleen, to join me to add just one final perspective. Colleen?
I love Dave's story of how he backed into his suicide prevention research with the help of his mentors, and his parents played a very important role as well. My parents as well were influential in my journey to the suicide prevention community, particularly my mom. She was an artist at heart, sparkling blue eyes, an infectious smile, so creative. Professionally, she was a psych nurse at what in the 60s and the 70s they called state mental hospitals. Some of my earliest memories are of her in her crisp white uniform, the starch cap, the white stockings, and the navy cape. And sometimes on her days off, when my dad was at work and my brothers were at school, she would drive her station wagon back to the hospital, she'd load up some of her patients, she'd bring them back to our house, and serve them lunch around our dining room table. Now, I was just a preschooler at the time, so I didn't completely understand the implications of these secret field trips of hers. But I did feel that the laughter and the smiles that happened around that table were generated from this simple act of kindness. But she, behind her infectious smile, she dealt with her own demons, including addiction. And when I was 13 years old, I came home from school one day to see flashing police lights in the streets and a coroner's hearse in our driveway. And on that day, whatever was going on, she felt suicide was her only option. And she killed herself. On that day, April 25th, 43 years ago this week, unlike Dave, I did not back into suicide prevention. It slammed head into me, dragging me, screaming and kicking, into my new life as a lost survivor. But I look around this room today at so many brilliant minds that are focusing on improving suicide prevention, and I'm so encouraged. I'm encouraged every week by the passion and empathy of my fellow volunteers at the National Suicide Lifeline. And a shout out to any of you that are here, because you all give me hope. Everything Dave was going on, and I so appreciate the work of he and his colleagues to focus research and innovation and technology in suicide prevention, because it gives me hope that we are going to continue to learn more about the assessment, intervention, and the treatment of the suicide mind, so that other lives, like my mom's, will not unnecessarily be cut short, and their loved ones will not have to live a life as a lost survivor. So that's why it's important to me. It's important to Dave and to me that we invest in today's mentees, that we facilitate and encourage other young people, like Dave was encouraged, to grow and learn at this AAS conference. And so to do that, we have developed the CAMS Care Student Scholarship Award to help fund other students who are interested in attending this conference in the future.
And so, 2018, Washington, D.C., the 51st Annual Conference of the American Association of Suicidology, and we will be supporting a student to come, just like my folks did for me all those years ago. And who knows, there might be a student in Anchorage, Alaska, living on student loans, who is desperate to come to our conference, and we'll make it possible for them. It may be someone from a hard luck town, an underdog type, who doesn't have it quite all together, but has the potential, with the proper mentoring, to make a real difference in our field. Someone who aspires to decreasing suicide-related suffering in all its forms, and someone who shares our common bond, which is to prevent suicide as a leading cause of death across our nation and around the world. And let's face it, if I can do it, anybody can, including each and every one of you. Thank you.